Unfortunately, violent extremism is a new normal that we might have to live with for some time into the distant future. And it takes different forms. There is violent extremism, which is based on terrorist organizations that are fighting for geopolitical space, ostensibly to set up political, entities of their own. And so when people talk about setting up a caliphate, they're struggling for geopolitical space to set up, a political entity of their own. You also have localized violent extremism, which is terrorism that, is aimed at disrupting the state system. You have peacekeeping experiences when it normally has to do with terrorist organizations that are trying to create geopolitical space for themselves. So, for instance, in Mali, there are different groups trying to establish their own areas where they can operate in. You go to Boko Haram, they've been struggling to establish a caliphate of their own around the Sambisa forest and northeastern part of Nigeria. But then you also have the threat of localized terrorist groups within that just want to spread fear and terror in order to disrupt the state system. And so they'll attack a local hotel and kill as many people as possible. You saw in Côte d'Ivoire, they went to a beach and just randomly started shooting people on the beach, just to strike fear and terror, in the people. A lot has been said about the causes of this violent extremism. Of course, the first and most important one is exclusion and marginalization. If people feel that the state does not exist for them, then they owe no loyalty to safeguarding the state. And so they'll easily take up arms against the state. The next is lack of effective political occupation of a state's territory. And so if you have government only in the national capital and a few urban centers, and you go to the rest of the rural area, and the state is not effectively occupying its political space and geographical space, then groups like this will attempt to intervene and insert themselves in that space. But there are also other issues that have to do with ideological radicalization of people, and that is an ongoing thing. There are various groups that try to radicalize people and get them to act in ways that they believe is compelling on them because of their religious beliefs and things like that. And then you also have issues of climate change and population pressure. Those are also issues that are affecting the issue of violent extremism. My experience has been both at the ECOWAS level as ECOWAS chair, and then also as chair of the Tana Forum, like you said, but also having been the President of the Republic before. I know about some things that have happened in the past. One of them, the President alluded to this morning when he talked about an incident in 2015 when a supposedly charitable organization, it was supposed to be a religious charity, was recruiting people, especially from tertiary educational institutions, and shipping them off to go and fight the jihad in Syria and in Libya. There were a few students from some universities in Ghana who left their courses and went abroad to go and fight, for what they believed in ideologically. And so there even you see that it's not always the poor and vulnerable, but even somebody who has a bright career future in front of them, doing a prestigious course, will leave it and go to fight for what they believe in. And so it's a very hydra-headed issue that, we need to confront, as he said, with, new and innovative solutions. There's also the incident of a bus full of people ostensibly recruited on their way to Libya, and probably continuing to Syria, that we intercepted our national security at the time. And you have to look at the legal environment and how to deal with people like this, because we intercepted them, brought them back. Our law says you can't keep people like that beyond 48 hours. And so it needed innovation and collaboration with the judiciary to see how you could remand them for a longer period so that you could carry out the kind of investigation and be able to neutralize the threat, that they would prove to society. Incidentally, eventually the threat was neutralized. They were released, and we haven't had anything since then. Aside from that, we deported 2 suspicious characters, detained 1 soldier who were involved in various suspicious activities. We found a lot of ISIS material in their possession and all that. And so we deported them, and the soldier we dealt with internally. But let me just zero in on Ghana and show what, the opportunities that we have, that is the strengths that we have, but also the weaknesses that we have. Happily for Ghana, we have an effective local governance system. So at least in 260 districts of our country, you have a district chief executive, you have a district security committee, you have a police command, you have the representatives of the judiciary and local courts, you have assembly members. And so the political space is effectively occupied with, a governance structure. And so that kind of vacuum does not exist. Aside from that, I would say that relatively there is inclusion in Ghana. We don't have the kind of exclusion that you find in several other countries. Electricity coverage is 86%. Every district capital is connected to the national grid. And so electricity is available for small and medium enterprises to operate. Every district capital and most communities have access to clean drinking water. About almost 80% of our population has access to clean drinking water. It's not the same in many other localities. There are health facilities in every district, either health centers or polyclinics or hospitals. There are schools from the basic level all the way to the secondary level. And in many districts, there's 1 tertiary educational institution. And so there's been a geographical spread of the fruits of development across our country. And so that helps us create the kind of resilience that you need to violent extremism. Eventually, the best safeguard against violent extremism is to create resilient societies that are not disrupted or destroyed because of these kinds of attacks. The other strength Ghana has is in its democracy and accountability. And I think that is something that we must defend and safeguard. If people feel that they do not have the opportunity to participate in the way they are governed, then they begin to have the pent-up frustration of not feeling that they are part of a state system, and so they will try to disrupt the system. Happily in Ghana, every 4 years we have the opportunity to go for elections and decide if we want to retain the government or to send it packing. Aside from that, at the local level, we have the local government elections. This year we're supposed to have assembly elections, and of the more than 6,000 electoral areas in this country, people will have the opportunity to choose who they want to represent them in their local assemblies. In addition to that, we have a constitution that says that 5 to 8% of total government revenue should be transferred directly to the districts to use for their own development programs. I think that is something we must thank our constitution drafters for, so that it's not like it's the central government that is deciding how budgetary expenditure should be made in every part of the country, but that the people to have a fund that comes occasionally they can use to build, or to provide their own felt needs when it comes to development. So I think that is a strength that we must be grateful for. But most of all, we must be happy for the free expression that we enjoy in Ghana. If people are able to vent their frustrations, then it does not pile up until it becomes a frustration where they think that they're not being listened to, and so they must take up arms against the state. And so a free media, where people are able to, vent their frustrations, call into any program in their own dialects and say what they think is wrong with society, I think is also a very contributory factor towards the resilience of the society to stand against extremism. But most importantly, we have religious tolerance in Ghana. It is interesting to see the religions, major religions, and even the minor religions living side by side and coexisting without any problem. Muslims and Christians and Buddhists and, all kinds of people, exercise their religions freely. Our constitution says that there shall be freedom of worship and the freedom to express what your religious beliefs. And that has been largely respected. And so people don't have a problem expressing their religious beliefs. And nobody is persecuted for expressing any religious beliefs. And I think that that is a good thing. Luckily, we have level-headed religious leaders who have, pursued rapprochement between the religions. I always give the example of Maulvi Wahab Adam when he collapsed at the funeral of President Atta Mills, and an ambulance was brought to take him to the hospital. Just before the ambulance took off, Palmer Buckle jumped into the back of the ambulance and, kept praying for him and, talking to him until they got to the hospital. I mean, this was a Catholic and an Ahmadi. We have the example too where, as Vice President, I was asked by Professor Mills to attend the National Hilal Conference of the Chief Imam. And that's the conference that decides the program for the Ramadan fast and all that. And I got to Bolga, and in the morning we were going to the venue, and I asked where it was, and it was at the Catholic Social Center. The Hilal Conference of the Muslims was being held in the Catholic Social Center. In other places, they would not accept to do it in the Catholic Social Center, or the Catholics would not even agree to give their social center to the Muslims to hold a Hilal Conference. But that is the strength of our society. But we do have threats, and the threats are ethnic tolerance, intermarriages amongst people. A lot of Ghanaians don't marry wives from the same area they come from. And I think that that helps in building resilient societies. But we do have threats, and the threats are the same as in most African countries. We have a growing youth bulge, and we are not creating opportunities as fast as possible for the young people who are coming out of the various levels of the educational system. And so you have the threat that with the lack of opportunity, with the lack of jobs, these people can, become deviant and decide to take it out on society. So we need to grow our economy faster. We need to create more employment opportunities for our young people, even as our population continues to increase. And it affects the whole of Africa. It is said that in some years to come, Africa will be almost 2 billion people. The point is Africa growing fast enough to create the opportunities for these young people to be able to find work? So that is the number one threat that we face as a country. The next one is the growing inequality, and it's the same as in other countries. The difference between the rich and poor is widening. And so while you have people who are very vulnerable and have nowhere else to turn, you have the opulence of the rich and famous, side by side. And that creates the kinds of frustrations that can make people, try to disrupt society. So that's something that we must look at. Then aside from that, we have issues of climate change. And we're seeing the manifestations already in our country. Because of increasing population and climate change and competition for fewer water resources, competition for grazing lands and farming, we're already having clashes between pastoralists and farmers because the traditional grazing lands have changed. And so you have more pastoralists coming from the Sahel into a region that was mostly reserved for farming. I mean, we didn't used to grow cattle as much as we did, but with the increasing migration of pastoralists into the country, there are beginning to be clashes between themselves and sedentary farmers. If you take the Ashanti Akim area, that's become a very famous area for these kind of clashes. That is around Agogo and other places, you always find, violence between pastoralists and farmers. The soldiers have been sent there several times to try and restore law and order. But as population continues to grow, we're going to see more of such incidents taking place, not only within Ghana, but in the whole West African sub-region, or should I say the whole continent. Already in Nigeria, in the middle part of Nigeria, there are continuous clashes between Fulani headsmen and the local farmers. And these are things that we need to look at. Thank you very much.